This is one of the most disappointing photos I've ever taken. And I'm not even joking. Let me explain why. This location is called Split Apple Bay. I think judging by the look of this rock here, you can tell why it's called that. So when I got this shot home, loaded it on the computer, all excited, and discovered that I'd missed my focus point, hopefully you can understand my disappointment. For sure this holds up at screen level, but if I wanted to actually print this out, if I zoom in here to the formations, you can see that it is actually very soft. A lot of my landscape work gets printed around a meter or maybe even more, and so even just the slight softness like this, very disappointing. So I revisited this location and I took another series of photos, and this time when I was there, the Milky Way was not lining up to actually see the split in the rock, unfortunately, but I think at least I got a sharp photo. If I zoom into the rocks and let Luminar render that, you can see that this time I didn't bump the focus ring, so I was able to get a nice sharp image. Sure, it's very noisy, and that is going to be the case with taking astro photography. Obviously, you're going to be working at higher ISOs. As you can see in this bottom right hand corner, here I was at ISO 3200, and I shot this with the lens that I predominantly use for my architectural photography, and that only stops down to f4, as you can see here. So it's not a particularly bright lens. So normally for doing astrophotography, a lens that stops down further, say f2.8, f2 would be preferable. But with this file, if I zoom out, you can see that with a lens that only goes down to f4, and as long as your camera can capture a relatively clean file at ISO 3200, you can get a Milky Way shot. And before I get into the editing, if you guys would like some instruction on how you take better photographs of the night sky and the Milky Way in particular, just write Astro Help in the comments, and if I get enough requests, I'll put a video together for you guys on that. Anyway, one of my viewers, Peter Betts, has requested, can I edit a night sky? Can I do a Milky Way edit inside of Luminar? So that's the purpose of this video, so let's dive in. First thing that I always like to work with is the Enhance AI. But before I start working with the individual tools, what I want to do before I start adding one tool on top of another and compounding the editing effects, I want to use my unedited raw file and actually take a look at the individual tools and what they can do. So what I mean by that is, grab the Accent AI slider, bring it all the way up, and just have a little toggle off and toggle it back on, and just look at the image and see what it's doing as an overall effect, and then start to understand how the individual tools are actually affecting the image. And do I want to apply it to the whole image, or would I like to utilize the mask? So in this instance, it's certainly boosting up all this interest in the trees and in the rocks here, but I feel like while it's brightening the sky up, it's kind of washing things out a little bit. So I may want to use the mask to actually just introduce this Accent AI filter just where I want it. Okay, for now, let's turn that off and let's jump into a couple of other tools. One thing I'll definitely want to look at is, can the smart contrast do anything for me? And in this instance, I really like this rich contrast that it's adding. It's bringing in vibrancy to the colors, especially around the horizon line here. So using this smart contrast is certainly something that I will want to be doing. Let's have a look at Structure AI. This may well be beneficial for the sky. And as I crank that up, let's even boost it even further. Let's see what that's doing. Okay, so let's have a look at the Milky Way itself and the stars that are there. If I toggle this off and then turn it on, it's certainly bringing out a lot of detail in all these stars. For sure, we're also enhancing the rocks here, but they're kind of getting a bit of an HDR kind of look, so I want to steer clear of that. Let's have another toggle of off and put it back on. I definitely think that some of this Structure AI will help us through the Milky Way section here. Okay, let's turn that off, and the next filter that I'm going to look at is the Landscape filter. So I'm just going to bring the dehaze slider up and down, and just have a look around my picture and just see if there's any areas that I feel that it's enhancing. And I'm not convinced that that's really helping us. Okay, I don't need to worry about any of the creative tools yet, but I may come in for a little bit of a glow towards the end, but we'll see how we go. So the first thing that I do want to do is jump into the light section here. A very important step when you're working with your raw photos is make sure that rather than having the Luminar default profile on, you come to a camera matching profile. Now we can either go for a very flat image and go for a camera neutral profile, or we can give things a little bit more pop with either the standard or the vivid effect. Now, I normally like to start working with a more neutral and more flat image and actually controlling the contrast more myself rather than letting the profile apply the contrast to my image. By choosing a neutral profile, the raw file that you're actually working on, it will initially be interpreted with slightly greater dynamic range. So you have more information in your shadows and your highlights, and then you can finesse the contrast yourself. So the first thing I'd like to do is sort out my temperature. I feel that the overall image is a little too warm, so I'm going to bring the temperature down towards the blues. I'm going to grab the tint and just play with that slightly and just feel how I want this to go. And just make a judgment call with my eye exactly how I want that tint to sit, but somewhere around there, maybe a little more magenta. Let's go with that. If we look at our histogram here, we can see that most of our tonality exists on the left-hand side of the histogram. So that's indicating that we have a dark image. The distribution of all the darks is over here. So you may feel that you want to bring the exposure itself up. As I push it to the right and our histogram redraws, this is more of a correct histogram in terms of what the textbooks would tell you, but obviously we are shooting a night sky. It is supposed to be a darker scene, and so we can bring that right back down because guess what? The night sky is dark, so the fact that our histogram is dark, I'm happy with that. Let's grab the smart contrast and start bringing some of that in. Now, I don't want to push this too far because our water here is getting quite black, but I do really like the sky. So, I don't know, let's kind of split the difference. Let's put that around that sort of 50 mark. Grabbing the highlight slider and giving that a little wiggle left and right. We're not making too much of a change there, but I think I'm going to boost the highlights up just ever so slightly. And the shadows, as I grab that, obviously the shadow slider is having the greatest effect on this image because most of our tones are all existing within the shadows. So just a subtle increase on that goes a long way. I actually feel that our black and white points are actually in a pretty good place already because if I zoom in, you'll see that the stars that are represented in the Milky Way here are certainly already hitting white. But because we are already peaking at white, we probably can push it just a little further, just to get a little bit more brightness contrast in there. And then bring the blacks down. And if I zoom out, so as a base raw conversion, just using that one panel at the moment, that's looking pretty good. Let's toggle our before and our after, and we've got a much more contrasty and clean file. I feel that everything was a little too orange and a bit too light pollution-y, and now we've got a better exposure, contrast, and a color temperature that I feel sits better with a night sky. Those kind of, even though when we look up the night sky itself is black, not blue, I feel in terms of a color temperature, rather than having it sit in a neutral gray, just pushing it a little bit more towards the blue. That's my aesthetic preference anyway. As we've made those adjustments, I feel that the greens are just getting a little bit too saturated here. So I'm going to jump into the color section here, and I don't want to pull out any of the overall color. What I want to do is be specific and talk into the greens here. So if I jump into the saturation section, I can come into the greens and just start to dial those back. Because I want the main interest in our photo to be the Milky Way itself, I don't want our eye going to this very, very bright and oversaturated green section. If I turn that off, you can see just how strong those greens are. And then if I turn the color adjustment back on, we can see that we've reduced those greens. And just to help tie this in a little bit, I'm just going to bring the cyans down a little bit, play with the yellow slider. We can see that's not really doing too much. And we can move on from the color section. Now we certainly want to add a little bit of denoise because obviously shooting at ISO 3200, 6400, those high ISOs, you're going to start introducing noise. But a good thing to do is zoom in because you may think, oh yeah, I really want to get rid of a lot of the noise. But as you actually increase the luminosity denoise, some of the details with the stars may start to get lost if you push it too far. So keeping that around that midpoint there, that's a nice compromise, I find. Something that I absolutely must change, and I've got to do it right away. I can't go on my edit any further without doing this, and that's sort out the horizon line. You can see that it's just slightly wonky, and as my son would say to me, oh, that's really triggering me, Dad. And so what we need to do is just bring our cursor outside of the canvas, and that will turn into a little rotation tool, and then we just click, hold, and drag until we feel that we've got the horizon line nice and straight. And if I click and hold and we follow along the line that runs along that horizon line there, we can see that that's actually pretty true now. And if I'm happy with that, I can just close the tool down and I know that the horizon line is now straight, but there's a little bit of an optical illusion going on, I feel, because I do feel like it looks as if it's sloping down to the left. But as we just saw, that's not the case, so I just need to be okay with that. Okay, initially we looked at the Enhance AI and the Structure AI tool, and we had a look at what they can do for us. So now I think it's time just to start adding some of those effects back in where we want it. So as I pop the Accent AI back on, we can see that that effect was very, very strong. So I'm just going to bring it up somewhere around that 40% mark. Oh, maybe I'll go a little higher. Somewhere around that 60% mark. I'm going to get my brush, and now what I'm going to do is, with an opacity somewhere around sort of 35, I'm happy with that. I'm just going to paint this effect in, and I'm certainly going to go over the Milky Way itself. I think I'm going to go all the way over the water because that's very dark down there, and I want to bring a little bit of life back into that. I'm going to avoid the rocks and the trees on the left-hand side because I feel that they're already quite punchy and vying for our attention. The place where I think we need to look is dead center on the Milky Way and this rock right here. And that's why I use the Enhance AI tool predominantly around this area and also bringing up the detail in the water. So let's toggle this off and toggle it on, and you can just see as I switch between the off and on version, we're just starting to enhance the areas where we want our viewer to look. We looked at the Structure AI, and that certainly helped with the sky before. So let me turn this back on, and at 100% and with that boost, it's way too much. But it's always a good idea just to push things quite heavily to start with, just so that your eye can get used to what that effect is doing. Then you can come in with a reduced amount and then start using a paintbrush just to say, okay, I'm now going to define the areas where I want that effect. And if I just want an even lesser amount of it, say 17%, I'm going to come in, click, and start painting over the rocks, because I didn't mind what it was doing to the rocks, but at full intensity, like I say, it looked a little bit too much like HDR gone wrong. And so I want to avoid that. So, okay, let's have a look at our before and after with the Structure AI toggled off and toggled on. It's pretty subtle, but again, all the time we're helping to enhance what's already there in the Milky Way. One thing I like to do with pretty much all of my photos is just glance around the edge of the frame, and if I see something that's particularly distracting, usually something of high contrast or that's particularly bright, such as this rock area just here, I normally either crop it out or I will clone it out, just because I really don't like having something sat right on the edge of my frame. It's too distracting. And so I've probably got three options to deal with this. I could either do a simple fix, which would be to crop it out. Another very quick fix would be to try Luminar's Erase tool and just paint over the top of that and let Luminar's AI deal with it. Or a more controlled way, which is the option I'm going to go for, and that is to come into the clone tool in the professional section, and I'm just going to sample from one area of water and paint it over this area here. And normally I would build this up in stages, but I forgot to reduce my opacity and it seems to have done a pretty good job. So I'm just not going to rock the boat and just go with that. Now there's a little hot pixel just down there that I'm just getting rid of as well. And I'm happy with that. And so I'm just going to see while I'm in the clone tool if there's other things I want to get rid of. So this little brighter area, I'm just going to go over that. I'm now at 50% opacity, and so I don't need to completely remove things. I can just dial them back. So I might do the same at the edge of the frame for this little brighter bit of leaf just here. So I'll click and paint over that once. Look around the rest of the frame and we're pretty good. Now I don't want to mess with the sky too much, but if there's a particularly bright star right at the edge, I might just click once just to get rid of it. Okay, let's close the clone tool down. And as it applies the clone tool, it's then going to apply all of the effects that we've done, as we see, right back over the top of that. So here's our before and here's our after. Before and after. I currently feel that things are getting a little bright on us and we're probably a little undersaturated. So what I'm going to do is come back up to the essential tools. I'm going to come into color, grab the vibrancy and just bring that up a little bit. I'm also going to jump into the light section, grab our exposure, and I think just bring that down a little bit. I'm relatively happy with the direction we've gone in. I just want to take things a little further by using our local masking. Now we have so many options with the local mask in terms of controlling the viewer's attention, where we're getting people to look, where we get our viewer not to look. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with a bit of localized dodging and burning. And I always recommend doing that with the local masking feature rather than the dodge and burn tool, just because you've got more control here. If you take things too far and the burn is getting a little bit too dark, for example, you can always come in and just reduce the sliders. We're going to select the paintbrush tool, and now I'm just going to come over, click once, and I'm going to be starting to paint with 17% opacity. So I'm just darkening everything down. Currently we're just seeing the slight reddening of the mask that I'm using, but as I let go, you'll see that everything just darkened down slightly. I use my left bracket key just to reduce the size of the brush again, click and paint. Now I normally use a tablet to do all of my painting of masks and things like that, but just for my tutorials I tend to do it with a mouse, just so that those of you who don't have a graphics tablet are able to see that it's totally possible with a mouse to paint your masks. Just so it's clear as to why I'm actually painting this mask and darkening this down, I just feel that things are a little bit too bright in this rock formation here and the tree as well. It's all about guiding attention, and I think that the key player, the main role in this photo is the Milky Way, or at least it should be, and currently on the left hand side of this frame things are just shouting, look at me, look at me. It's just a little bit too distracting, and so by painting in a mask which is actually going to darken this area down, I think that's going to help our overall picture. Let's have a little look at our before and our after, turn it back on. It's subtle, but it's starting to help. Now I'm going to add another local mask where we're going to brighten things up. So currently we've brightened the exposure over the whole photo, so we have a global brightening effect, but because this is a mask, what that's going to allow us to do is click and start painting. So I will brighten the Milky Way, and all I'm doing is just clicking and painting, and each time I'm adding this mask in at that opacity of 17%. I use my right bracket keys and my left bracket keys just to control the size of the brush, and the water is certainly too dark down in the foreground here. So I click and I paint. Let's add a little bit of saturation to where we've just painted as well. And now I'm going to add another mask. In this mask, what I want to do is actually control the watercolor. I think things are getting a little green in there. With this mask, I'm just talking into the water area here. So what I'm wanting to do is just make the water a little more blue, brighten it up just by boosting the shadows slightly, and I've also dropped the structure, and that's just helping to just soften this area off. So now I'm just going to paint this in. Again, I'm working at that 17%. I might even push this up just a little higher just so that I can get this done quicker. Okay, I'm happy with my local masking and the changes we've made there. So now it's time just for those finishing touches. So let's come back to the editing section. And I mentioned using a glow before, and there's a specific glow that I like to use, and it works quite nicely for astro work. And one of the reasons it does is because it actually softens things up in both the highlights and the shadows. So discrepancies that you have with noise at the pixel level, it just gets softened off really nicely. So I use the mystical filter to do that. And just so you can see what it does, I'm going to push it all the way to 100. And in its style, it shares similarities with the original Autumn effect, but I just feel like it's really nice how it also softens the shadows. It also boosts a bit of the saturation, but obviously at 100%, that is far too much. But I'm just going to reduce that amount just down so that we've got about a third of that effect. Let's toggle it off and then toggle it on, and it just adds this sort of ethereal, dreamlike quality to your photo. And for a subject such as a beautiful star-filled sky, I think it works really nicely. You could absolutely stop right there with your edit, but I am a bit of a fan of just adding a little bit more mood by tweaking the colours. So obviously we could do that with the mood filter and choosing an appropriate LUT. And I just find the instant feedback you get from flicking through the LUTs just very gratifying when you've done all that work of editing the photo, and now you just get to apply a brand new sort of colour tonality to it. It's really nice just to see what these colour grades can do for you. But I've got nothing in particular that's really standing out to me. So instead what I'm going to do is jump into the toning section and actually control the colour of my shadows and my highlights myself. So let's work on the shadows first. We can crank the saturation up so that we can see what's going on. And now it's just a case of sliding through the hues until we find a colour that we feel works for our image. And I certainly feel that if we push things into this blue spectrum, again, that's just helping to enhance that rich blue sky. Maybe we don't need quite as much in the way of saturation, but let's leave that there for now and let's see what we can do to complement that with the highlights. Let's push the saturation up again so we can see exactly where it's affecting. We can always bring it back down afterwards. And now as we push through the colors, we can see what options we've got. We could go for a more harmonizing blue tonality, or what I think would look better is if we actually work in the yellow-orange spectrum, and now we've got a nice complementary color balance going on. Let's toggle this off, toggle it on, and then we can just make some adjustments if we need to. We could come in and individually reduce the highlights and the shadows, but what I think we're going to do is just grab the overall amount slider and we can toggle that up and down, and then just by moving that left and right, keeping an eye on our photo, we can kind of finish up in a place where we feel that is the appropriate amount of toning for this photo. I really enjoy using the tools inside of Luminar, so I could just keep playing with this photo and tweaking things, but we don't need an excessively long video. Let's call it done. Let's look at our before and our after. This is our before, very orange, not particularly dynamic at the moment, and boom, we've just really enhanced that night sky feeling. I really like this edit and I would love to know what you think of it, so do let me know in the comments. And if you would like me to put a video together on how I take these astro photos so you can get out there and start taking some yourself, just write Astro Help in the comments, and with enough requests I will certainly put a video together for you guys. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Say bye bye to the little birdies in the tree, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.